Yeah.
I said, well, I'm going to give the letter. I know they don't have that. She's waiting to get the letter from the Vietnamese government. Because of course, not the Lord. 20 minutes later, here comes a faxed letter from the Vietnamese government. It was legit. He was on the second trip to the remains of his buddies. He was another himself. And he was on the second trip. And I walked through the court with that bad boy in this place. Yeah. Said something, he chill bumps this thing about it. When he came back and said he didn't find any of his friends. But he found some others, so he found some solid that he has been able to find some remains. It's really not to the battle side. It's pretty wild.
Jared, just trying to introduce myself, Zealan Hoover. Thank you for having me.
Very nice to meet you. Now, I have to ask, kind of weird stuff I do. I assume that's Dutch?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Zealan. Zider Z, you know, I mean, what?
Few generations removed from my folks are trying to create it, so came up with it. It was great, except we took a trip to New Zealand one time.
Oh, yeah, I bet you did.
But other than that, it was pure gadget.
Glad you're here today. It'll be tough, but we'll be fair.
You know, as Bob says, oversight makes it better.
That's a shame. I feel the same way. As long as we're doing it constructively.
Okay, terrific, thank
Look forward to
you.
answering your questions.
Thank you. You got my stuff? I will be nice. Might need to kick me every now and then.
What was going on last night in DC?
My boys swim on the high school.
Yeah, this is one.
One of them's a senior, and last night we were supposed to be the night of snow.
Okay.
But last night was senior night.
Oh, you weren't out in DC.
No, I was on the road up here. Got here about 1, got everything set at about 1:30. But it was worth every minute.
Last meeting, this is in high school. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Last company,
Well, that's neat that you stayed for that.
the first votes out of this in the United States Congress. I haven't seen the first championship. Same number we used last night. I did it last night. I held on to it last night. You looked at it last night. This is my last competition. That's it. This cool. Yeah. So I'm good. So obviously I'm going to be exhausted today because I'm stupid or more stupid than usual.
But the image of Morgan Griffin in Washington, the water looking for mouths.
That's right.
I'm having a wildlife night. There are, I'm sure they're here. They got enough rats.
So it's the snowy owl here. I'm only here 3 years. Yes.
Where was he?
2 years in a row. Union Station.
Union
That's
Station.
where I saw him. I was at Union Station. Little hot spot.
Yeah.
I don't know that she's coming from.
And over towards all of that is a hot spot. It's a resting area where birds are migrating through. And for owls, but whenever there's an explosion, Last night, one of them is senior, and this last. Grace was down on Twitter.
Hey, Morgan? Hey, Morgan? When do we tackle the effect of climate change? When do we do it? Every September when we do it.
Yeah, we need, yeah, that's good. I figured, yeah. Yeah, I've never seen a condor in a while.
I'm 99% I saw. You see a turkey. I saw a condor that I went to one turkey once and I saw. The bird I saw.
Yeah, so my area is 2.5 inches, and we get 12 inches a year. Sure. We're gonna, the mayor's having a stormwater.
Ask all of our guests to please take their seats. Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to today's hearing of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. Over the past 3 years, the Biden administration has made it clear it is willing to push the boundaries of executive authority. Whether it is making rules to force power plants utilizing our most reliable energy resources offline, setting impractical standards designed to mandate electric vehicles on the American consumer, or shelling out billions of federal funds to preferred industries and giving outside organizations billions of taxpayer dollars. It seems to be obsessed with a rush to a green society. Unfortunately, the passage of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, last Congress has only further empowered the administration to pursue its radical green agenda. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, which has been chomping at the bit for this green push, received around $41.5 billion for 24 new and existing programs. Today, we will focus on one of the more unconventional programs that I've come across in my tenure, the so-called Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This fund includes some characteristics of what are known as green banks, or institutions that receive taxpayer funds and then claim to mobilize and leverage investment in low-carbon technologies and infrastructure. Under the IRA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund provisions, the EPA received $27 billion to hand out to nonprofits, states, tribes, and cities to support the deployment of zero-emissions technologies and greenhouse gas reduction projects. This is a staggering amount of money, almost doubling the regular appropriations of the EPA. Under the IRA, EPA must decide how it is going to hand out all $27 billion by September 30, 2024. That's just 9 months from now. In order to accomplish this, the EPA has decided to split the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund into 3 accounts or programs and hold 3 separate funding competitions. Under the National Clean Investment Fund, one of those programs, the EPA will pick 2 or 3 nonprofits to establish the so-called National Clean Financing Institutions. These National Clean Financing Institutions will then choose green technology projects which will receive taxpayer dollars. The second program is called the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and it will choose 2 to 7 nonprofits to serve as hubs that will then provide tax dollars and technical assistance and training to small and unconventional lenders to finance so-called green projects in poorer and disadvantaged communities. Finally, the so-called Solar for All program will award grants to states, territories, tribal governments, municipalities, and nonprofits for community solar programs. Particularly with the first 2 programs, EPA is picking a handful of nonprofit grantees and giving them wide latitude to manage and distribute taxpayer dollars and abdicating a lot of the responsibility for how that money is spent.
In other words, a few nonprofits are going to make decisions on who receives billions of dollars of taxpayer funds. There is something that doesn't sit right with nonprofits giving out billions of taxpayer dollars. The EPA has never administered a program quite like this, and this committee has a lot of questions. How is the EPA evaluating applicants and attempting to select the best grantees? Who will be involved in that process? When these grantees make loans for clean energy projects, how will they determine which projects to finance? What qualifications will their staff possess? How will the EPA monitor the work of the grantees once the money goes out the door? And how will the agency maintain accountability? What remedies will the EPA have if the money is not used as directed or authorized? Did certain special interest groups or individuals have priority access or outsized input in designing these programs and therefore gain an unfair advantage in the competitions? What happens when projects fail? We hope to answer these questions and more today. The committee has been pushing the EPA for more information about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and while it unfortunately took some prodding, the EPA has agreed to join us for this hearing today. And we welcome Mr. Zealan Hoover, Senior Advisor to the Secretary at the EPA. Mr. Hoover oversees the EPA's implementation of both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the IRA. As a part of these duties, he has also been involved in establishing the new Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hoover, and I look forward to learning more about this new program and the controls that the EPA is setting up on these $27 billion that are at stake to make sure that whether we agree with the program or not, that the taxpayer dollars is being spent appropriately. I yield back and now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Castor, for her 5-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Griffith. Good morning, everyone. Across the country, American families and businesses are moving to cleaner, cheaper energy, and they are doing more to protect their homes and businesses by making them more resilient to costly extreme weather events. Fortunately, the Inflation Reduction Act, passed by Democrats in 2022, is helping to accelerate the cost savings. I often tout the IRA as a patriotic law because of the extensive Build America and Buy America incentives and requirements. And so far, it is working. Private sector companies have announced over $600 billion in manufacturing and clean energy commitments just over the past 3 years. The jobs being created are good ones that provide pathways to the middle class. For example, the median annual salary for wind service technicians and solar photovoltaic installers is around $60,000 per year, nearly 25% above the national median. And one study found that workers newly employed by the growing green energy sector have wages 40% higher than they earned in non-energy jobs. To build on the early success and help our neighbors save money, Congress should be investing more in resilience and removing the hurdles to cleaner, cheaper energy. What's happening is too often a lack of affordable financing is a major challenge for many projects, especially in working class and disadvantaged areas. That's why the Democratic-led Congress, and in fact many of the members on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, envisioned and authorized the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The Select Committee's report recommended Congress should establish a national climate bank to finance targeted deployment of clean energy and other decarbonization technologies and climate-resilient infrastructure. The climate bank should capitalize new and existing state and local green banks and finance and zone projects. They should prioritize environmental justice, frontline, and rural communities, and emphasize support for projects without clear revenue models or lacking significant returns, such as certain energy and climate-resilient infrastructure. Focus on the gaps. Representative Dingell had early envisioned a green bank. Chairman Pallone had, for many years, had proposed this. Finally, through the IRA, Energy and Commerce was able to push this forward. In essence, we envisioned affordable capital for clean projects to leverage private sector investments to enhance the impact of the awards. And now, thanks to EPA's leadership, the fund is ready to launch with the help of state and local communities, tribes, and eligible nonprofits under 3 competitive funding opportunities, each aligned with the statutory objectives set by Congress and aimed at building sustainable pathways to capitalize clean projects. Like other programs that EPA oversees, award recipients will make subawards and loans to expand community lending capacity and support residential solar development. This initiative also includes key environmental justice requirements to ensure that underserved and historically disadvantaged communities are a central priority, as Congress intended. My Republican colleagues, so wedded to dirty fossil fuel corporations, often like to muddy the waters with false narratives regarding clean energy. So let's set the record straight. EPA is focused on implementing the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as Congress intended and has built a robust process to oversee awards and hold recipients accountable. Every award will be subject to stringent financial reporting requirements, so EPA can monitor how these awards are used. EPA requires detailed reports to ensure that projects supported by federal dollars meet key milestones. Annual audits, record-keeping requirements mean that EPA will be able to independently verify funds that the funds are being spent appropriately and proactively detect bad actors. Buy American requirements will also make certain that fund projects rely on American workers and American manufacturers. Those are the minimum requirements. EPA is also empowered to make awards contingent upon mitigating award-specific risks before awardees receive any monies. We in Congress have an obligation to conduct oversight and make sure all of this happens, and that's exactly what we intend to do. Preventing costly impacts of the overheating climate is not going to be easy, and we know we need to make sure that every dollar is going where it should. I have a copy of each notice of funding opportunity that was issued under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. For the record, they're not insubstantial and provide clear details about eligibility, the application project, and reporting requirements that will be mandatory for every awardee. I've included these documents on the list of proposed documents. For the record, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our hearing, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gently yields back. Now recognize the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for her 5 minutes of of opening statement, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. President Biden and the congressional Democrats made it their top priority in 2022 to jam through the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Talk about misinformation. They did it at a time when millions of Americans were struggling to put food on their tables, afford to heat their homes, and keep their businesses afloat. The president boasts that it's one of his administration's crowning achievements. In reality, this disastrous legislation, which actually led to record inflation, is still hurting families. It's filled with massive subsidies to the administration's favored industries and giveaways to radical special interest. The IRA's climate and green energy provisions, so-called, give away nearly $400 billion in incentives to further President Biden's radical rush to green agenda. Let that sink in for a moment. The Biden administration is giving hundreds of billions of dollars to its political allies to force Americans to use less reliable energy sources and electric vehicles they don't want. This rush to green agenda only further compromises America's economic, national, and energy security. China dominates the market for electric vehicle components, solar panels, and materials essential to renewable energy production and storage. And increasing our reliance on these resources and products increases our reliance on China, our biggest adversary and the world's leading polluter. There's many issues with the IRA, but today we're focused on the largest non-tax program in the IRA. Whoops. The so-called Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Through this program, the EPA plans to hand out $27 billion to support so-called green technology projects. Even more concerning, 2 of the fund's programs were designed so that EPA can funnel billions of taxpayer dollars to nonprofits that happen to be their political allies that can then fund the projects of their choosing. This is a perfect scenario for cronyism to take hold. Another concern is the timeline for these funds being allocated. The IRA was enacted in August of 2022. The law requires EPA to allocate all $27 billion by September 30th, 2024. That's 2 years to design a first-of-its-kind program and choose which entities will receive the taxpayer dollars. I just heard, oh, they're going to have annual audits. They're independently going to verify every dollar, make sure every dollar goes where intended. The EPA doesn't even have an internal audit now. The EPA has no internal audit. I don't know about you. I was kind of shocked to learn that this year. I've only been in Congress 20 years. The EPA has no internal audit. The EPA was never authorized by Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the elected representatives of the people. And the Inspector General, the EPA's Inspector General, has warned us that this program is at serious risk of waste, fraud, and abuse, in part because of the timeline at a hearing before this subcommittee last March. This program is a perfect storm for green corruption. The American people expect us to hold the agencies accountable for the use of their hard-earned taxpayer dollars. These are hard-earned taxpayer dollars. I just met this week with a startup, exciting health technology, IT company, artificial intelligence, where they're going to be able to detect cancer. And what did he say? He said the taxes are making it really hard for us as a startup to do our job. And I'm thinking, yeah, so that we can throw money, so the EPA has 10 times the money that it had just 2 years ago. The American people expect us, as their elected representatives, to do the oversight, and that is what we intend to do today. This is a massive infusion of funding in recent years. EPA has been given $100 billion for the president's radical rush to green agenda. It's 10 times the amount this agency has in an annual appropriation. This hearing is an important part of our effort to ensure accountability and transparency. And I thank Mr. Hoover for being here. I look forward to you answering our questions. This is our responsibility on behalf of the hard-working taxpayers all across this country. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes of question, or
Thank you, Mr.
statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Congress, Democrats delivered historic wins for the American people by passing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These Democratic investments are already growing our economy and creating good-paying jobs while also cutting costs for American families. And the Biden administration is working to complete implementation of these landmark laws so we can continue to build on the early success. But instead of supporting these needed investments to revitalize domestic manufacturing and accelerate clean energy deployment, Republicans are desperately trying to undermine essential programs before they even get off the ground. Today's hearing is no different as Republicans baselessly attack the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This fund, created as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, is critical to ensuring that nobody is left behind as we transition to clean energy. For years, underserved communities that have tried to invest in clean energy have repeatedly run into obstacles accessing the necessary capital. And the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is designed to fix that problem by building sustainable community lending capacity so everyone can benefit from clean energy. The Inflation Reduction Act included $27 billion for EPA to build the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. EPA is still implementing the fund and working through the award selection process for each of the 3 funding opportunities announced last year. This program is a game changer. Third-party estimates project that investments made through the fund could save Americans more than $100 billion and create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs over the next decade, particularly in low-income and disadvantaged communities. And this is what investing in America looks like: good-paying jobs today for a cleaner and healthier tomorrow. This is exactly the kind of thing this committee should be getting behind. But not one Republican supported the Inflation Reduction Act, and now, true to form, they're already attacking it. And their attacks are unwarranted. EPA has already put in important safeguards to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent properly. Each funding opportunity from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund includes mandatory reporting requirements that apply to any award or sub-award so that EPA can assess award performance and the progress on meeting key milestones. EPA also included annual audits that allow it to monitor how recipients are using their awards in order to make certain that funds are being spent appropriately. EPA has also the flexibility to make final awards contingent upon recipients taking additional steps that mitigate award-specific risk identified in the selection process. And these are strong oversight requirements that EPA has put into place to help ensure that every dollar goes towards accomplishing the fund's goals. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is critical to our efforts to meet the environmental and economic challenges we face today. The worsening climate crisis is wreaking havoc across the nation, costing families their homes, their livelihoods, their lives. Wildfires and extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change are ravaging our communities. Just last year, Americans experienced more billion-dollar disasters than any other year on record, and natural disasters linked to climate change cost Americans more than $92 billion. By drastically cutting our emissions, we can aggressively combat the climate crisis, protect our communities, grow our economy through the clean energy transition, and save money in the long term. I'm always disappointed when Republicans say they care about oversight, but then make it clear at hearings that their only intention is to tear down programs that they oppose. They don't want the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to work because they don't want anything to undermine their agenda of putting polluters over people. And the size and scope of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is very large, but so is the challenge of combating climate change. Constructive congressional oversight can enhance EPA's efforts to mitigate program risk and make certain that every dollar has the greatest possible impact. So for the future of our nation and our world, we should be doing everything we can to ensure that this program succeeds. And I look forward to hearing from the witness today and how we can best accomplish that. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. That concludes members' opening statements. The chair reminds members that pursuant to the committee's rules, all members' written and opening statements will be made a part of the record, but we do remind you to please provide those to the clerk promptly. We want to thank our witness for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. You will have the opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from members. Our witness today is Mr. Zealan Hoover, Senior Advisor to the Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. We appreciate you being here today, and I look forward to hearing from you. You are aware the subcommittee is holding an oversight hearing, and when doing so, we have the practice of taking that testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to testifying under oath?
No, sir.
Seeing no objection, we'll proceed. The chair advises you also that you're entitled to be advised by counsel pursuant to House rules. Do you desire to be advised by legal counsel during your testimony today?
No, sir.
Seeing none, if you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Seeing the witness answered in the affirmative, you are now sworn in and under oath, subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. With that, now recognize Mr. Hoover for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Griffith, Ranking Member Castor, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Zealan Hoover, EPA's Director of Implementation for programs authorized by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on EPA's implementation of the congressionally enacted Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a first-of-its-kind national-scale competitive grant program that will bring public and private capital together to address the climate crisis, create good-paying jobs here at home, and deliver lower energy costs for Americans, all while reducing harmful pollution, particularly in low-income, disadvantaged, and rural communities that have so often been left behind. Today, I want to tell you about the objectives of the fund, how EPA is implementing the program, and EPA's work to ensure the funding is spent responsibly, transparently, and consistent with statute. Through Section 134 of the Clean Air Act and enacted by the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress created the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and appropriated $27 billion to remain available until September 30th of this year. It is important to emphasize that EPA is not authorized to directly fund project investments. Instead, the statute defines eligible grantees, and those grantees will provide the financial and technical assistance to individual projects. Section 134A1 appropriates $7 billion for competitive grants to states, municipalities, tribal governments, and eligible nonprofits to provide subgrants and financial assistance to Solar for All grants that must enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy zero-emission technologies. Sections 134A2 and A3 appropriate $19.97 billion for investment in any project, activity, or technology that reduces or avoids greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution, or assists communities in their efforts to do so. Congress specifically directed that $8 billion of that funding be used specifically in low-income and disadvantaged communities. EPA has designed 3 exciting grant competitions to enact this statute with the following objectives. First, reduce emissions of greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollutants. Second, deliver the benefits of those investments to the communities across America that need it the most. And third, mobilize private capital so that our public dollars are bringing in the private sector so that we have much greater impact. So about these competitions. First, the $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund competition will provide grants to 2 to 3 national nonprofit institutions that will partner with the private sector to provide affordable financing and technical assistance for tens of thousands of clean technology projects all across the country. Second, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator competition will provide grants to 2 to 7 national nonprofits that will build the capacity of trusted community lenders working on clean financing in low-income and disadvantaged communities. Together, these incredible programs will enable families and small businesses to access previously unavailable financing for programs like, for example, battery storage, community wind and solar, geothermal heating and cooling, home energy retrofits, and deployment of electric vehicle charging stations. Third, the $7 billion Solar for All competition will award up to 60 grants to states, territories, tribal governments, municipalities, and eligible nonprofit recipients to build a future where clean, affordable solar energy is accessible to millions of households. Since the end of the application period in October, EPA has been conducting a robust evaluation and selection process that draws on expertise within our agency and across the federal government. Roughly 250 people from EPA, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, and other agencies have been reviewing and scoring applications, with each application scored by multiple individuals. Every step of the evaluation and selection process has been conducted in line with the high standards of EPA's competition policy and in close coordination with our career ethics attorneys and the career staff from our Office of Grants and Debarment. All 3 competitions are now in the final stages of this selection process, and EPA is on track to make awards by our statutory deadline. To successfully implement this program, EPA has brought together experts in clean energy finance and underwriting, financial oversight, and more. All entities receiving financial assistance from EPA may only expend EPA funds in compliance with the applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and the terms and conditions of the assistance agreement, regardless of whether they receive the funds directly from EPA or as a subrecipient or program beneficiary. EPA will also require detailed reporting and audits to enable prudent oversight and public transparency. In conclusion, EPA appreciates the direction and resources provided by Congress to implement this program that will facilitate tens of thousands of clean technology projects. We also appreciate that the committee shares our focus on ensuring taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly. We're committed to transparency and openness with Congress, and will continue to keep you updated on our progress. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now move to the question and answer portion of the hearing. I will begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Now, as I mentioned in my opening statement, under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs, the EPA will choose grantees to then pass through billions of taxpayer dollars as they see fit. Accountability for EPA's subgrantees is of prime importance for the administration of this program. What specific, a little more than just your general, touched on in your opening, but just a little bit more specific, what specific audit and debarment measures is the EPA planning to include in the text of its award agreements?
Thank you, Chairman. We have 4 lines of defense to ensure program integrity through this program. And first is that robust evaluation and selection process that I just spoke to. The first line of defense is to select the very best and most qualified grantees. Second line is to assign a certified project officer to manage the grant and ensure compliance with all of the terms and conditions. The third line of defense is that the program office will review the standard reporting and audits and conduct their own additional performance audits as necessary. Fourth and final, our Inspector General and the Inspector General's office will conduct their own oversight activities and audits that are in addition to the program-led audits and the standard audits required under the Yellow Book and Green Book.
Okay, so here's the question that a lot of taxpayers are going to be asking as they watch this from home. So we're giving out billions of dollars to third-party groups, and you're going to have audits of those, but what about the people they give the money to? Are you going to have audits of them as well?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. In accordance with 2 CFR 200, Section 501, each grantee is going to be required to obtain a single audit from an independent auditor if the grantee expends more than $750,000 in federal funds.
And that includes the people, the third party. So you're giving it to the XYZ organization, and they give it to the ABC organization. That includes the ABC organization?
Congressman, all of the audits will be conducted in accordance with the Single Audit Act and OMB's guidance on audits, which cover a wide range of programs, including subawards.
All right.
I'd be happy to provide more information on those standards.
And I appreciate that. With the EPA, will the EPA commit to requiring the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grantees, subrecipients, and pass-through entities to provide information and be responsive to this oversight subcommittee? Yes or no?
Congressman, we share your commitment to.
So yes or
waive
no?
fees.
Will you guarantee that those folks are going to respond to us? Not just to you all, but also to us as the elected officials?
Congressman, we take this committee's oversight role very critically, and we're going to make sure that we are responsive to all requests.
So that's a yes. I can put you down as a yes, that not only you, but you will make sure that the subrecipients will also be responsive to this subcommittee.
I fully expect that all of our subrecipients.
So that's a yes. Can I put you down officially as a yes? You're under oath. All right, that's what I'm looking for. All right, now, here's the reason that I'm going after that. And I know my colleagues want to say we're just against these programs. And while I didn't vote for the bill and not sure we're going to spend all that money in the right ways, once we commit as a nation to spend that money, I want to make sure it's spent right. So I want to guarantee from you that you all are going to do better than what the Department of Energy did under their program when they lent money to Solyndra. And let me run you back on that, because you got into this battle of you're going to pick winners and losers. And I get that. You're going to pick some winners and you're going to pick some losers. Some of these programs are going to be losers. We get that. Here's what happened in Solyndra that was unacceptable. They had a provision in their program and in the law that said if they don't meet the standards and they're in default, we stop giving them money. Department of Energy didn't follow that. They subrogated, also in violation of the law, about $150 million of taxpayer money. They were in default on December 1st, 2010. They subrogated late December, early January 2011. One of their own internal people said this company will not survive and it will go bankrupt but by the end of August of 2011. Well, they were off by a day. They went bankrupt on September 1st. They were supposed to contact the Department of Treasury under the rules, Department of Treasury, I'm thinking of auditors here, and Department of Justice if they were going to do anything different in the contract, and they were never supposed to subrogate. They never contacted the Department of Justice, and when they contacted Treasury, Treasury says, we don't think you have authority to do this, you better check with Justice, which they never did. So the agency clearly violated the rules set forth in the law. Can you assure me that the EPA is going to do better than the past with the DOE? I understand it wasn't EPA, but we need to make sure we're doing this, because if we're going to spend the billions of dollars of taxpayer money, whether rightly or wrongly, we have to make sure on this subcommittee that it's being done correctly and the taxpayers are getting a good shot at getting more winners than losers. Can you commit to me?
Congressman, thank you for that question. As we heard in the opening comments, this is an incredible opportunity to do great work, and so I personally and everyone is committed to spending every dollar to the highest and best impact, and we're going to hold our grantees to a very high rigorous standard, and they're absolutely going to follow the law.
And if that doesn't happen, we ask you to let us know so we can go after it. All right, I appreciate it and yield back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, ranking member, for her 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hoover, for being here. You know, I think about my neighbors back home in the state of Florida. They're kind of getting hit right now by a double whammy. Our investor-owned utilities have over-rely on gas. So their electric bills are out of sight right now. Then the impacts of climate, the overheating climate, more flooding, these very intense hurricanes, it causes increases in your flood insurance and property insurance. So people are really hungry for ways to reduce their electric bills and make their homes and businesses more resilient. Talk in practical terms. Okay, say there's a rural community in Florida, or there's a working class community. A lot of those neighbors do not have the resources to go to handle that upfront capital cost, maybe for solar panels on the roof or on their business or their church. How does the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund work in practical terms? What do these local communities that don't have a lot of capacity to upfront this money, how do they tap into this, and what's the direction from EPA to these partners across the country?
Congresswoman Castor, first, thank you for your leadership on climate change, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this incredible program and what it's going to mean for those folks in your district and all across the country. We know that there are investments that families, small businesses can make today, be it in solar panels and storage, high-efficiency appliances, electric vehicles, that will save them money and improve their air quality. The challenge is that even though these investments will save them money long-term, they have a higher upfront cost. You're paying more upfront, you're saving money on the operations over time. And right now, in too many parts of the country, it's too expensive to get an affordable loan to make one of those investments. And too many folks are cut out from that opportunity. And so what we're going to be doing through this program is working to establish a network of relationships with trusted financial institutions in hopefully all of your districts all across the country, so that when someone in your community is interested in putting solar panels on their house or buying a heat pump, and they go to their local trusted financial institution, there's a financial product there that's affordable, it's easy, it's standardized, it's seamless. They can make that investment the same way that they would go to get any other financial product, and then they can benefit from these investments, which will be good for their pocketbook, good for their family's health, and good for the climate.
And then how will that work with say a local government, a small city or town, if they want to do something to benefit their, whether they might have a municipal utility, or maybe they're tied to the investor-owned utility? How will they be able to interact with say your community bank or the other nonprofit that is helping to lower costs? How will that work?
Absolutely. There's a few different ways that local governments can benefit from these programs. First, through the National Clean Investment Fund, our grantees will have the opportunity to engage directly in and finance projects at the local government level. And there are so many ways that we can help local governments make investments that are good for climate change, good for climate resiliency, and also help them balance their books. EPA, as you all know, has a big mission on clean water and clean drinking water, and one of the areas I'm most excited about is our ability to shift our pump stations and water treatment centers to low-cost renewable energy. It cuts emissions, it reduces operating costs. Those costs flow down to lower utility bills for consumers. You could see financing for solar panels on schools or electric vehicles for government workers in their official duties. And so there are a lot of opportunities where we can take these, again, rigorous high standards for underwriting and loans, and make financing available to local governments to do.
And does this, I think about the folks in Rep. Kamek's district, or in the Panhandle of Florida, or Southwest Florida, or in St. Petersburg, that have really been flooded out, or this intense storm comes through and their insurance doesn't cover all of the cost of making their home or business more resilient. Does the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, does it help with resiliency as well?
So we've identified a set of criteria for qualified projects. Those are focused primarily around our statutory direction of reducing climate emissions and other air pollutants, but there's a number of co-benefits that go with that. And so there are so many types of investments where when you're going in to a community to make those investments that are good for the climate, you can be smart, measure twice, cut once, and make investments that are good for climate resiliency as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Yes, thank you. Now I will recognize Mr. Burgess for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Lesko. Let's talk for just a minute about some of the specific evaluation criteria that you used to assess the 180 applications that you received across all three grant programs. You get $27 billion and you received 180 applications. That doesn't seem like a very large amount for that amount of money. Did it seem strange to the agency?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. We intentionally made the application incredibly rigorous. The ranking member lifted up a few of the printed out copies. Each application is hundreds and hundreds of pages, and so we wanted to make sure that only the most serious, qualified, rigorous applications came through. So it's in line with what our expectations were.
Well, in your testimony, you have you said that you wanted to involve the private sector, and yet, for the $14 billion in the National Clean Investment Fund, you're providing grants to 2 to 3 national nonprofit institutes. Where's the venture capitalists in this equation?
So, Congressman, the requirement to first provide awards to nonprofits resides in the statute. We only have the statutory authority under Section 134 of the Clean Air Act to issue awards to eligible nonprofits, and the statute sets forth several criteria under which a nonprofit is eligible to apply. But the goal and the way that we're holding these, or rather evaluating these nonprofits, is to make sure that they have a clear plan to mobilize the private sector, to bring in private capital, because that is also a statutory mandate. And that's how, in part, how we're going to assess our effectiveness in implementing this program.
Why did you decide on awarding to nonprofits as opposed to states, municipalities, or other entities?
So in Section 134A1, we have the statutory authority for the $7 billion to award to states, municipalities, tribes, and eligible nonprofits. And in that competition, we will be making a number of awards to local, state, and tribal governments. In Section 134A2 and A3, we only have the statutory authority to make awards to nonprofits.
So Chair Griffith went through some history on some failed programs in the past, and granted they were Department of Energy, not EPA, but a lot of us on this committee have concern that we don't ever want to be in that position again. And with Solyndra, we were talking about $100 million, and here we're talking about $27 billion. So the types of controls, you say you've got robust oversight. Let me just ask you, as a member of Congress, what can we expect to hear from you on the reports that you're going to create?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. First, I want to hopefully assuage some of your concern by stressing that one key difference between this program and some of the programs that have an important role in funding early stage investments is that this program is really about deployment of proven commercialized technologies. And so we are not going to see these kinds of big investments in early stage, potentially untested programs. There's a time and a place for that type of American innovation and leadership, but that's not going to be happening in this program. And so that at the sort of beginning does a lot to de-risk the individual investments. To your specific question about reporting, we're going to require rigorous quarterly and annual financial reporting in accordance with the federal regulations under 200 CFR 200.329. That includes reporting on grant expenditures, environmental outputs and outcomes, and financial statements disclosures, including, and importantly, audited financial statements consistent with the single audit requirements.
Well, there has already been some concern expressed that auditing is not something that occurs at the EPA, so I hope that you are correct in that. Let me just ask you something that's sort of off topic a little bit, but you're the EPA, and we don't get you in here very often. So I just purchased my 4th hybrid vehicle since 2003. I like the hybrid, I like the technology. My regret is that we haven't invested the energy in plug-in hybrids that we have in fully electric automobiles. Does the EPA play any role in that?
Congressman, that question pertains to some of the regulatory work in our Office of Air. I'd be happy to have my team follow up with you on that question.
Well, I wish you would, because it has been again, it's a regret of mine that, yes, I was able to buy my first pickup truck that's a hybrid. In Texas, that's important. But I'd much rather have a plug-in hybrid if I could, so that all of my commuting around town is basically off the battery. But then if I need to go to the mountains or the beach, I can fill up the car and off I go. Thank you, Chairman Lesko. I'll yield back.
Thank you. And now we'll recognize Rep. Chakowski for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much. I feel really frustrated when we have conversations about the environment. Most Americans understand that there is a climate crisis, partly because they live it every day. They are finding it in their communities, the flooding, the extreme weather events that are really affecting them very personally. And so I feel like every time we talk about addressing it in a real and concrete way, where we have the expenditures, but also the outcomes that we expect in detail, that somehow this is some kind of a slush fund that the president and the EPA just wants to hand out. These are very important things. And I wanted to focus mostly on the issue of air pollution. We've talked about air pollution for decades, and yet we find that recent studies have found that air pollution is responsible for over 100,000 premature deaths and nearly $1 trillion in health costs. And we know that low-income communities are most vulnerable. In the city of Chicago, we have had a cumulative map that was done in our community, and we have found, not surprisingly, that Black and brown communities are suffering most from air pollution. And it's not just a matter of addressing, and that's so important, the health factors, and if you could talk a little bit about that, but also the jobs that are created. I would like to hear you talk about some of the jobs that will be created because of this program. I know that there's been criticism somehow of not-for-profit organizations, and yet time after time we are hearing about how we are failing to help the most wealthy for-profit organizations, big oil and big gas, that we should be paying more attention to make sure that those industries that are the center of the environmental crisis in many ways, that we have to pay more attention to that. I'm glad to hear about the oversight that you're going to be doing of these nonprofit organizations. But I am wondering if you could talk about how the EPA is doing to ensure that these low-income communities are going to particularly, I hope, be addressed.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that important question. And really talking about air pollution and jobs are two of the bright spots of this incredible program. By statute, we're directed to focus both on climate emissions and air pollution, and we're directed to focus on low-income and disadvantaged communities. And so that's exactly what we've done in this program, as we do across all of our programs at EPA. And I am really excited. I mentioned in my opening statement tens of thousands of projects across the country. What that means is tens of thousands of homes that are replacing polluting equipment with zero-emission forms of heating or cooling. It's families that can upgrade to solar panels and storage. It's families that can afford to purchase an electric vehicle, and that's going to both benefit them directly and reduce their indoor air pollution, the household air pollution. It's also going to benefit their surrounding communities. And so as this program gets rolling, I expect that in the communities that are currently most overburdened by air pollution in Chicago and in communities across the country. We're going to see these types of projects touching down with real meaningful input. And of course, every time you're installing a piece of clean technology equipment, someone's doing that work. That's a job that's getting created, and we have included in our evaluation of the program, making sure that everyone we partner with has a plan to make sure that these are good quality American jobs so that we are building out that middle class.
Let me just ask in the few seconds I have you made any kind of estimate about the level of job creation that this program could bring to us? How many jobs can be created?
Not at this time, but as soon as we make our selections and we're able to analyze the plans of the individuals that we selected, then we really look forward to being able to quantify the incredible impact they'll have.
And we look forward to hearing that. Thank you so much for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, and now I recognize the chairwoman of the committee, Representative McMorris Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Of the 3 greenhouse gas reduction fund programs, $27 billion, the most expensive is the National Clean Investment Fund, which will distribute $14 billion. Under this program, EPA will choose 2 to 3 nonprofits to operate long-term financing institutions or green banks. So, $14 billion going to a few groups to hand out as they see fit. While the EPA has not disclosed its list of applicants, media reports have identified 5 organizations seeking NCIF funding. The list of potential recipients reinforces my concerns that the Biden administration is using this program to advance partisan interest and enrich political allies. Here's a few of the examples. One serious contender for a share of this $14 billion is Power Forward Communities. This new entity, which has been formed to secure a Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund award, is a coalition of several organizations, including Rewiring America. Rewiring America's leadership includes a former Obama White House appointee, a former employee of liberal political action committees, Democratic politician Stacey Abrams. Rewiring America is a project of the Wind Forward Fund, which is controlled by Arabella Advisors. Arabella Advisors funnels donations to many various far left-leaning nonprofits. Another example, the board of another applicant, the Coalition for Green Capital, includes former Biden administration officials and a former senior staffer of the Democratic National Committee. These include David Haynes, a former senior official of President Biden's White House Climate Policy Office, who was central to advancing President Biden's climate agenda. So, Mr. Hoover, how will the EPA prevent organizations led by former Biden appointees, especially those who've had a role in pushing for the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and designing the program, from gaining an unfair advantage in the application process for any of these programs?
Thank you for that question, Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The evaluation and selection process for all 3 competitions is being conducted in line with the highest standards of federal ethics rules and the EPA competition policy, which ensures the fair and impartial treatment of all applicants. And so every individual participating in the evaluation and selection process has been screened according to those rigorous federal standards.
Thank you. Thank you. Will these applicants be complying with the conflict of interest policies when deciding which sub-recipient should receive funding? And it seems like this is a massive undertaking given the use of pass-through entities to distribute funds.
So what we did is we've established 70 evaluation criteria for these competitions. We've brought together 250 experts from across multiple federal agencies. We're assessing our applicants against those evaluation factors.
And will that go to the sub-grantees also?
So applicants applied in many cases as parts of coalitions and with named subrecipients. And so we're looking at their holistic plan. And again, these are expert
Okay,
folks
thank you,
across
thank
the
you. My question is, so we have, let's see here, $14 billion going to 2 to 3 entities. My question is, are you going to be looking at how, if those recipients comply with the conflict of interest policies?
So of those 70 criteria that we're assessing them against, there's a number of governance standards, financial risk management standards, and other requirements.
So is the answer yes or no? Are you going after the sub-recipients? Or, I mean, not going after, but are you holding them to the standard, the sub-recipients?
Congressman, if your question is specifically which federal ethics requirements.
No. My question is, EPA is getting ready to give $14 billion to 2 to 3 nonprofits. Those nonprofits are going to distribute the $14 billion. My question is, are the recipients of the $14 billion going to be subjected to any of the conflict of interest policies?
They will be subject to all of the terms and conditions of their financial assistance agreement, which is going to enshrine all of
Okay,
the
thank you.
requirements. Notice of funding.
I will follow up in writing. Will the EPA make copies of selected applications available following this announcement?
Ma'am, we will work with the committee to produce documents upon request. I would have to check on our ability to share competition
How are
documents.
you going to track the sub-recipients and their money?
So we have extensive requirements around reporting that we apply to this and the many thousands of other grant awards that EPA makes. Those are set under federal regulation, and we'll be holding them accountable to those federal requirements.
Much more to come. It still just is beyond my comprehension that there's no internal audit at EPA. So I just am like, it sounds good, perhaps, but the question is, I mean, we can't get answers for current EPA funding. So stay tuned, everyone. I yield back.
Now I recognize the ranking member of the committee, Representative Pallone, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank the chairwoman. The Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act passed last Congress includes historic investments to combat the harmful effects of climate change and provide much-needed resources to states and communities to build a cleaner and more sustainable future. These crucial investments are accelerating America's clean energy transition and helping Americans save money on their energy bills. And the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is key to ensuring communities across the country can apply for funding for a variety of projects promoting clean energy initiatives. I have a series of questions, Mr. Hoover. Let me first ask, how will the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund help Americans benefit from clean energy and other pollution-reducing technologies? Briefly, though, because I have a lot of questions.
The Ranking Member Pallone, first I just want to thank you for your leadership role in passing the Inflation Reduction Act and giving us this incredible opportunity. We're going to be, through this fund, providing financing to households, communities, small businesses to deploy tens of thousands of clean technology projects. And so the impacts are going to be wide, they're going to be varied, and they're going to be directed to the households and the communities that will most benefit from those investments that cut energy bills and reduce localized air pollution.
Well, thank you. Now, can you describe where EPA is currently in the process of implementing the program and when we can expect awardees to be announced?
We are nearing the end of our evaluation and selection process. We look forward to announcing selections as early as March, and we are on track to have all of the funding awarded by our statutory deadline later this year.
Well, thank you. Now, what is EPA's ongoing role going to be after the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grants are awarded?
Once the grant awards are made, there will be a project officer assigned, and EPA's responsibility is to ensure that our grantees are adhering to all of the terms and conditions of that award agreement, which is a legal agreement between the federal government and the grantee. And I'll just say that in the last 7 years, EPA has awarded 18,000 grant awards. We know how to do grant awards, we know how to manage grant awards, and we're really looking forward to managing these.
All right. Now, I think that clarification is important for us to move beyond some of the assertions, that I think are baseless that have been made by the committee Republicans about the program. So let me issue 2 more questions. EPA has extensive experience managing grant programs, you mentioned that, and ensuring that grant money is spent appropriately. So just explain how that experience is being used in your implementation of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that, Congressman. We have built an Office of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and we have pulled in expertise from across EPA and across the federal government. And so there have been a few stages of this, the design stage, the evaluation and selection stage, and then we'll be moving into the implementation stage. We have a fantastic career staff led by a career director and a career deputy director. We are hiring in and pulling in from across EPA and other agencies the very best project officers and audit staff. And that career-led office of fantastic EPA career staff are the ones that are going to be working with our grantees to provide them support so that they're successful, but also to make sure that we're holding them accountable and adhering to the high standards of transparency and integrity that we've been talking about today.
All right. Last question is, how is EPA working with other federal agencies to mitigate any of the risks to the fund?
We've been incredibly fortunate to have the support of our partners across the federal family. We've had reviewers from Department of Treasury, Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Housing and Urban Development, and others. They've been playing a critical role in this evaluation and selection process. Prior to that, they played a critical role in drafting the notices of funding opportunity to make sure that we are drawing from the best ideas from across federal government. And as we move forward in implementation, we fully intend to continue drawing on our expertise both across relevant EPA programs and across other federal agencies to manage this program effectively.
All right, thanks so much. Now, obviously, the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act reflect the size of the challenge that climate change poses to every community, and our focus has to be on supporting effective implementation of all those investments. But I thank you for your response about how you're going about it. I appreciate it. And now I yield back, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Now I recognize Representative Duncan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, the challenges of the size and scope of anything that the local communities have to deal with is the size and scope of the federal government, which continues to grow, and it's no wonder we're $34 trillion in debt. The Inflation Reduction Act's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund language includes elements associated with green banks. While green banks currently exist, they are a relatively new type of institution. In particular, the publicly revealed applicants for the National Clean Investment Fund are new organizations formed by several smaller organizations for the purpose of obtaining Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund money. EPA's Environmental Financial Advisory Board reviews aspects of the program and provide feedback. Among many other observations, this advisory board has noted that existing organizations have not operated at the scale this program would require, creating management execution risk. While I understand the EPA will not comment on specific applications, how has the EPA evaluated applications by new organizations or new coalitions of existing organizations to ensure they have the capacity and management structure to handle this type of money?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. We developed for the NCIF and CCIA competitions incredibly robust applications with over 70 evaluation factors that included elements of past performance, investment strategy. Our applicants were able to speak to their track record as an established organization, or if they're a new new organization that is pulling together a coalition of existing organizations, they have some opportunities to speak to the expertise of their coalition members. But at the end of the day, every applicant is being held to the same high standards, and only the most qualified are going to receive a grant from this agency.
How has the EPA required them to demonstrate this competency? What are some of the things you're looking at?
So we've been looking at a wide range of past performance indicators and also their forward-looking investment strategies. I've personally found it quite compelling to look at historic loss ratios and other information about the rigor that they've brought to their financial oversight and management and their prior investments and programs.
Kind of like the offshore wind projects that are currently failing because they can't support themselves under the weight of the financial obligations they have without the government subsidy money. We could go on about this. You mentioned that people were brought in to run the program, so I'm not going to ask about the expertise the staff may have in providing financial services. As green banks are a relatively new concept, how did EPA go about designing any safeguards included in the program for preventing fraud and abuse of these nonprofits?
So, Congressman, I prefer to use the term community lender because when we designed the program, we didn't want to be focused on any particular type of entity, but rather look at those public, quasi-public, or nonprofit financial entities. So that could include eligible green banks that you spoke to. It could also include CDFIs, credit unions, the types of trusted financial institutions that I imagine have long track records in your district and all y'all's districts here in the room today. And we're really excited about picking partners that have networks that will get really good, rigorous work done.
But this isn't a match program, right? It's a grant program, so you're not looking at matching what the financial institutions are lending these organizations and matching them with these grants? Is that not
So
correct?
what we're going to be doing is selecting the very best partners for our grant. And then for these two competitions, our direct grantees who have that direct relationship with EPA are going to be, in the case of NCIF, providing both financial products and direct investments across the country. And in the Clean Community Investment Accelerator program, they're going to be providing sub-awards to a wide range of those community financial institutions to stand up green lending programs.
Will the EPA allow nonprofit grantees to collect fees for their financial services?
So we will have terms and conditions that prevent private profit from public dollars in the program.
How will the EPA determine what fees are appropriate?
So program revenue, so revenue that our grantees and their sub-grantees earn off of these off of their financial instruments and investments have to be recycled back into that program. So one of the exciting things about this program is that it has the opportunity to recycle, that it's not just $27 billion, but it's in many ways similar to other revolving loan funds in the federal government that Congress has authorized, where we'll make investments, those investments will be repaid. That will provide additional funding that we can continue to deploy. That has to be segregated from other business lines.
Yeah, last question. Is grid reliability a factor for the EPA in selecting grantees?
We care critically about that issue, and I know it's been a frequent topic of conversation in the context of our regulatory work. We're also looking at it here.
Thank you. My time's expired. I'll yield back.
Now I recognize Representative Tonko for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rapidly transitioning to low-cost, clean energy gives us the best chance to reduce our emissions and prevent the worst effects of climate change. Greenhouse gas reduction fund investments are just one of the many ways that Democrats are delivering on good-paying jobs that will grow the middle class and accelerate the energy transition. Independent estimates project that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund would create roughly 1 million jobs over the next decade. More than 350,000 of those jobs will be created in low-income and disadvantaged communities. In fact, we're beginning to see those data come in with the economy measurements that are done. This will strengthen our economy today and protect our future from climate change. My Republican colleagues lob complaints at the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund instead of trying to ensure its success. EPA, on the other hand, is working diligently to implement IRA investments with strong guardrails to mitigate risk and make certain that American workers and families directly benefit. So, we appreciate that sense of mission. Mr. Hoover, thank you for your leadership and for introducing a good opportunity here. What steps is EPA taking to identify and mitigate risks as it implements the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
Thank you for that question, Congressman, and for the opportunity to speak to the work that we've been doing. We have 4 lines of defense to ensure program integrity, and the first is, as we're just speaking to, the very intense and rigorous selection process that we've been running with hundreds of expert career staff from across the federal government. We're going to pick the very best, most qualified partners. Second line of defense is our experienced career project officers will be assigned to those grants, and they will hold our grantees responsible for the terms and conditions of that federal contractual relationship they have with EPA. Third, our program office will be conducting standard audits and reviewing reporting. And then, of course, we have the Office of the Inspector General, and they play a critical role as the 4th line of defense in their oversight and audit work as well.
Thank you very much. And how will EPA work with awardees to ensure that every grant dollar is spent to accomplish the IRA's bold climate and energy goals?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. One of the key ways that we'll achieve that is by making sure and holding our grantees accountable for investing in projects that meet the qualified project definition as defined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And we set out a few requirements that operationalize the statutory requirement that we reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution and assist communities in doing so. And so all of the funding that is spent through this program, it has to be consistent with U.S. climate goals. It has to reduce or avoid emissions and other air pollutants. It has to deliver the co-benefits in a meaningful way to U.S. communities, and it has to finance projects that wouldn't otherwise have been financed. This program is really about mobilizing private capital to achieve impacts that otherwise we would not have the opportunity to benefit from.
Excellent. Mr. Hoover, the Inflation Reduction Act included Build America, Buy America requirements that apply to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Buy America requirements are essential to maximizing the impact of federal investments for fueling our economy while fighting climate change. How is EPA implementing those requirements in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
So this program is subject to the Build America, Buy America requirements, and therefore any iron and steel manufactured products or construction materials that our grantees purchase through their award activities have to be made in America. And as the ranking member mentioned, there have been hundreds of billions of dollars in private investment in American manufacturing, and so we're confident that as this program gets rolling and as we're funding those tens of thousands of projects, there's going to be a pipeline of American manufactured goods and equipment to meet that demand.
Thank you. And how can EPA verify awardee compliance with Buy America requirements? And what steps can EPA take if those requirements indeed are not being met?
EPA is incredibly fortunate that we have a decade of experience administering the American iron and steel requirements in our Office of Water. And so as soon as the Build America, Buy America law was passed, we immediately drew on that expertise. And we've been working to apply these requirements across all of our bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act programs. And so we're building out a rigorous Build America, Buy America oversight and management program that starts with technical assistance to help our grantees understand their obligations and comply, and it ends with that audit and oversight to ensure that they are applying or administering it appropriately.
Thank you. Will constructive congressional oversight enhance this program guardrails and can further mitigate risk once EPA makes awards? So let's make certain that, excuse me, we're doing the right kind of oversight here to ensure that a program is being implemented correctly rather than trying to smear it before it even gets off the ground. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Now I recognize Representative Guthrie for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the recognition. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hoover. Kind of following what my friend from New York was just talking about in the Buy America. I know you talked steel, construction, iron, those kind of products. But in the green energy supply chain, just the nature of it, there are foreign entities that you'll buy from in the green energy supply chain. And, you know, my concern's about China. And when you talked about the terms and conditions and audits and inspectors, I guess my question is, what are the terms? What I'm going to get to is the terms and conditions of dealing with China. When I say the Communist Party of China, that's inseparable from the government. There's one and the same. And then any entity in China is commingled. There's not an entity in China that doesn't have some relationship with the Communist Party. They wouldn't exist. And so additionally, it appears that some of the awards from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund will go to nonprofits or coalitions of nonprofits. And EPA has stated that it will only be making awards to applicants that incorporate the United States. Additionally, the EPA has stated the committee that it will require nonprofit applicants to submit supporting evidence of their eligibility for the program. However, I'd like to learn a little bit about how EPA efforts to prevent foreign entities from China from exploiting the fund. And so my question gets to, will the EPA request any information on foreign ties or interests of applicants, coalition members, or partner organizations? And what kind of due diligence or background research will EPA do to ensure the applicants, coalition members, or partner organizations are truthfully representing themselves in their applications?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. We appreciate and share your concern, and that's why one of the terms and conditions in each of the award agreements is going to be a prohibition against entering into any form of contractual relationship with a foreign entity of concern. And the terms and conditions are a legally binding agreement, and those are then become subject to all of the oversight by both our program office and our Inspector General's office. And so this is an issue that we're going to be following very closely, and that will be a core
So
part
the entities can't purchase anything through supply chains that come from any foreign country? It's not just iron, it's not just the Buy America agreement. Any foreign country cannot You can't purchase anything from any foreign country?
So they won't be able to enter into a direct contractual relationship with or subaward funding to a foreign entity of concern. So that's one layer of defense on this issue. The other layer of defense is the Build America, Buy America provisions. And so, you won't be able to directly enter into a relationship with one of those entities. And then if you're going out and you're issuing a procurement, the goods that you're purchasing are also going to have to meet the very rigorous and statutory Build America, Buy America law.
Okay, but that's certain commodities, not necessarily everything in the supply chain.
It's iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction material, and so
Right,
it-
but there are other
it's
things
quite comprehensive.
that you'll buy. It is comprehensive, but there are a lot of things in the green energy supply chain that aren't those categories.
But it includes those categories if they are inputs to those products. So this is something that we're looking at very closely with the Made in America office in the Office of Management and Budget, because if you're talking about heat pumps, solar panels, electric vehicles, you're looking at the inputs. Both those can be considered manufactured products themselves, and then also the iron, steel, and manufactured inputs. And so when you roll it up, it is a quite expansive.
But there are a lot of electronics and a lot of things that go into electric vehicle. Battery elements to the battery. So when you say we only can buy electric vehicle manufactured in the United States, there are a lot of inputs that go into electric vehicle. So lithium for the battery that goes in an electric vehicle. Does all of that have to be, if you're gonna use this money, it has to be domestic, US domestic?
So we're going to be implementing these requirements consistent with how we're implementing the Build America provisions across all of our programs, which, consistent with the President's direction, is rigorously and expansively. We'd be happy to follow up in writing with more detail about.
You couldn't do a joint venture with a Chinese battery company
I don't believe
with this
so.
money?
I believe that
Or
that
could
would
you buy lithium from China to go into a battery with this money to buy an electric car? So understand when you say we're gonna buy an electric car, you can make it in Detroit, but there's thousands of inputs that go into that electric car.
What's exciting about the Inflation Reduction Act is it's shifting the entire American economy to reclaim that mantle of leadership in these technologies. And so I'm confident that because of these hundreds of billions of dollars in new clean energy manufacturing announcements that have been made, coupled with these requirements, by the time our grantees are funding projects, there's going to be a robust pipeline of domestically manufactured options. And
But if not, they can still purchase from China or somewhere else.
they would still need to.
I know you're betting on the come, but if it doesn't happen, they're not prohibited from buying somewhere else,
They would still be required to adhere to the Build America, Buy America provisions.
which is not every product in an electric car.
It looks at the overall value of the bill of materials in the car. So again, it is
But
a
it's not
quite rigorous
100%.
statutory requirement that we're implementing to the best of our abilities.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. And now I recognize Dr. Ruiz for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is structured to direct resources toward clean projects in underserved rural communities that lack access to affordable capital. Individuals residing in low-income, rural, or disadvantaged communities, such as those in my district, like El Centro, Blythe, Calexico, Beaumont, and others, have the potential to experience substantial advantages through the implementation of clean energy and other environmentally friendly projects. This is also important because many of these communities live in high polluted areas. Such initiatives will not only contribute to a reduction in air pollution, but also yields improvements in public health. As an emergency medicine physician, I have directly observed the profound connection between an individual's health and the environment in which they reside. The negative impacts of pollution and contaminated environments are evident, underscoring the urgency of addressing this issue through programs like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It is essential that communities like those in my district are aware of these programs in order to get the proper resources they need to take care of their residents. Mr. Hoover, I understand part of EPA's implementation process has been listening sessions and public comments. What feedback has EPA received from rural communities and tribal governments, and how is that informing your work implementing the fund?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. And we've talked a lot about American manufacturing, and I just want to thank you for your leadership in making sure that includes all of the lithium in the Salton Sea.
I'll get to that. I'll get to that.
We are making sure that this program benefits the rural and tribal communities that you just mentioned, we are very confident that this program is going to reach them in a meaningful and authentic way. So first, the NCIF and CCIA competitions, the $20 billion, those by statute have to be national competitions, but we are assessing each applicant specifically on their plans to reach every community. That includes rural communities, that includes tribal communities. Everyone we pick is going to be picked because they have a robust plan to do that. And then on the $7 billion Solar for All side, we've been really excited about the plans that we've seen to reach rural communities, and we've also received a number of applications from tribal governments and coalitions of tribes, and we're really excited about the awards that we're going to make there as well.
Thank you. Local organizations are often the best on-the-ground partners for federal programs. That is especially true in rural or tribal communities that might be hesitant to accept help from federal agencies. For this reason, Congress has required the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to rely on trusted community lenders and other local partners as intermediaries. Mr. Hoover, how is EPA evaluating Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund applicants to make certain that awardees will have strong relationships with local community partners?
Thank you for that question. We are really excited to leverage existing networks of community lenders and expand those networks through supporting new entities where there are gaps. We know there are broad swaths of the country that are unbanked or underbanked. That's a problem that is far greater than just the green finance space, but we're excited to solve it in the green financing space. And so this is part of the evaluation criteria, looking at the letters of support, looking at the project pipelines. Each of these applications is hundreds of pages, and that includes many dozens to hundreds of letters of support from community organizations, from local financial institutions, from local communities. And so again, we've been able to look at these holistically.
Thank you. And now getting to the lithium. One of the largest lithium deposits in the world is in my district in Lithium Valley at the Salton Sea region in Imperial Valley. The United States Geological Survey projects that Lithium Valley alone could produce 600,000 metric tons annually through geothermal production, which is 6 times the current global consumption rate. Such production would create thousands of jobs in my district that would advance the production of American-made clean technology. You know, the interesting thing here is that you don't have to dig dirt, and there's no dust being emitted, and there's no mining per se in the traditional sense. This is a closed system loop that produces steam and geothermal energy, and the lithium is extracted out. It's the most environmentally friendly way of extracting lithium from the earth. And by the way, I was just at a groundbreaking from Controlled Thermal Resources, which is going to produce a campus to extract lithium, produce the battery, and recycling of batteries right there in our country. So when we talk about the competition from China, why not be innovative, dream big, and let's invest in projects where we can beat China in this market, like in my hometown. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Now I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questionings. Republicans aren't the only ones that have concerns about taxpayer money being misspent. In fact, I want to read, I'll hold up the quote, but I want to read a quote from the Inspector General of the EPA dated March 29, 2023. It says, under the present circumstances, all of this would happen with no additional guidance from Congress and little oversight from the OIG. The rapid implementation of the program, combined with a relatively narrow window of availability for such a significant amount of funding, may lead the EPA to expend the funds without fully establishing the internal controls that mitigate the risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. Representative Griffith spoke about the misuse of taxpayer dollars regarding Solyndra. Last year, in an Energy and Commerce Committee hearing with the Department of Energy Inspector General, there was an Inspector General report that said that DOE Science was unable to verify that $50+ million in expenditures were audited. So what I'm saying is there's a history of government offices not being accountable with taxpayer dollars. On December 21st of last year, the House Science and Technology Committee sent a letter to the EPA asking questions surrounding their concerns about conflicts of interest with nonprofits being chosen by the EPA for this program. Why hasn't the EPA answered their questions?
Congresswoman, let me check on the status of that letter, and we'll get back to you, and we will make sure that if it hasn't been responded to, it will be responded to quickly.
Thank you. I checked with the committee. They have not been responded to. My next question deals with more measuring of this program. Are there any specific milestone grantees will have to meet during the performance period?
Yes, Congresswoman. Each grantee is applying with a rigorous investment plan, proposed project pipeline, and timeline for a wide array of necessary activities covering their investment work, their governance, their organizational structure. All of that will be enshrined in our terms and conditions of the grant agreement. And so they are committing to EPA as part of their grant agreement that they will execute on that plan, and our job is to then hold them accountable to it.
If the EPA determines that a grantee is performing poorly and making bad investments, but hasn't violated any of the terms of their agreement with the EPA, is there anything the EPA can do to step in and try to help them improve their performance, or any tools at the EPA's disposal?
Thank you, Congresswoman. These will be cooperative agreements where we'll be working in close collaboration with our grantees to make sure that at every step of the process, we're pulling in all the expertise from across the federal government to support them. We're giving them these grants, and then we're going to support them to execute effectively. If a grantee falls short in their legal obligations, though, I do want to stress that we have multiple tools under CFR 200 to ensure compliance. And those are authorities that we've used across our many thousands of grant awards where necessary to make sure that we are holding folks to the highest standards, and we would not hesitate to use them here if that became necessary.
Well, I hope that you do the work that you say you're going to do, because there has been a history of misuse of taxpayer dollars and things not being audited in Department of Energy and EPA and in other agencies. So I hope that you will be very diligent in the billions of dollars that you are going to have going through your agency. And with that, I yield back. Okay. Next, I'll recognize Representative Armstrong for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, the EPA can say, build America, buy America, and that's a great and lofty goal that's absolutely unattainable in certain industries under current policy. You might be able to build them here, but if you can't source the raw product because you're banning mining in Duluth, you're banning mining in South Dakota, you're doing all of those different things. We don't have a lot of solar in North Dakota, but my constituents are every bit as concerned about how we're spending $7 billion and whether our race for the politics of clean energy is really just a way in which we outsource our guilt. And not only do I not think it keeps the environment clean, but there's significant human rights issues to take into fact. In fact, it was so important that earlier this year, shortly after the IRA passed, the House passed a CRA. Last year, 2022, Commerce passed a 2-year tariff exemption from solar panels in China. And earlier this year, both the House and the Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, passed a CRA in which to remove that tariff exemption, and the president vetoed it in May. But I guess, just to start, Mr. Hoover, do you consider it important about the working conditions of those who make the solar panels that we're using in the United States?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I was glad to see that we've received applications to cover North Dakota through this program, and absolutely, we take the working standards of everyone who's impacted by this grant program very importantly, and that's one of the factors that we've taken into account when evaluating our applications.
Well, for anyone not aware, the solar industry relies heavily on components and materials that originate in the Uyghur region of China. The Chinese Communist Party carries out a campaign against the Uyghurs and forces them into labor programs, mandatory sterilization, cultural erasure, and more. This is so pervasive that we passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in 2021, which established a rebuttable presumption that goods mined, produced, and manufactured wholly or in part in the Uyghur region are denied entry into the United States. To contravene this, the CCP works to hide and move solar supply chains. The CCP also sends Uyghurs all over China to labor development programs, making it more difficult to ascertain whether the products were made with slave labor. And it's a shame that President Biden issued a solar emergency declaration in 2022 to protect Chinese solar manufacturers that the Department of Commerce determined these firms are illegally avoiding U.S. tariffs. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record overexposed Uyghur region exposure assessment for solar industry sourcing. In that report, it says that the Uyghur region alone now accounts for approximately 35% of the world's polysilicon and as much as 32% of global metallurgic-grade silicon production. The Uyghur region's continued dominance in the production of materials is essential to the manufacture of more than 95% of solar modules, represents significant exposure to state-imposed forced labor for the industry. The American people should feel pretty uncomfortable with spending $7 billion of their tax dollars on a program that relies so heavily on forced labor. But that's not even the whole point. When we're talking about how we're dealing with clean energy, I mean, most of the programs that are involved in this program are being designed and implemented to displace coal, correct? Or dirtier forms of energy?
Our focus is to help households, small businesses, and communities purchase the option that is best for their needs and that helps them have the most affordable, low emissions or zero emissions technology.
Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again, everything's cheaper when you give it a tax break or a subsidy, not just green energy. But do you consider coal to be clean energy?
So, Congressman, in this instance, we actually have a statutory direction to invest in low and zero emission technologies, and so we're just following the statute and how we're administering this program.
Every single polysilicon plant in the Uyghur region of China is 100% powered by coal. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund aims to promote the deployment of zero-emission technologies, including solar energy systems. And as we stated earlier, that China dominates the solar supply chain. According to the International Energy Agency, China's share of all manufacturing stages of solar panels exceeds 80%, and China houses the world's top 10 suppliers of solar photovoltaics manufacturing equipment. The EPA states Build America, Buy America, and domestic production requirements for infrastructure projects apply to certain projects and products that are funded in this program. My question is, under current policy, how are we going to do any of this stuff here? And I'm sorry, you don't have, my time has expired.
There are always questions for the record. Seeing that the gentleman has yielded back, I now recognize Mr. Palmer for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've sat through, I don't know how many of these hearings and listened to my colleagues across the aisle talk about things that just don't match the science, you know, the floods, the intense storms, that even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change disputes. And it's amazing to me. It's also amazing to me what you're doing to the U.S. economy. They named their bill that has this $27 billion slush fund in it, the Inflation Reduction Act. And just since the passage of that bill, American families have been hammered with record high inflation, causing adjusted household income to fall by the most since the Obama administration, fallen by 17%. So really what this should have been called, and by the way, inflation's back up in December, should have been called the Income Reduction Act. In addition, you know, the UK has tried to lead Europe in going to renewables. Since they've done that, Britain will achieve the lowest peacetime growth rate since 1780. It's hammered their economy. 1780, the year before Yorktown, I'm sure you had history and you know that was the American Revolution. In terms of what they're paying, Britain's paid $228 per megawatt hour for coal-generated electricity in 2022 compared to $27 because that's what the British government wants. They want to run up the cost of hydrocarbon fuel. It's $251 per megawatt hour for natural power generated by natural gas, where it's $61 in the U.S. And I could go on, and yet here we are going to throw $27 billion into renewables that people don't want, that won't meet our needs. There is no way that we can meet our needs with renewables. The only way that we can go to zero emissions will be nuclear. I'm a huge proponent of small modular nuclear. We're going to, you talk about creating jobs, we're going to create a lot of jobs in China. So can you guarantee the American people that none of this money will wind up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party or their affiliates in their industries?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As a brief,
I know you're grateful for that question, so answer it.
So we have two sets of rigorous controls here. First of all,
No, I just asked you a simple question. It's a yes or no answer. And as far as your rigorous controls go, it reminds me of the gain of function controls that you had on American dollars going into that, where you were given to a grantee and then to a sub-grantee, and there was no oversight over that. And I dare say, I doubt seriously there'll be any oversight over this. But it's a yes or no. Can you answer that question?
so Congressman, unfortunately, the answer is a little more complicated, but I would.
Well, no, it's simple. You cannot guarantee that because we cannot build renewables without investments from China or into Chinese companies, because we don't produce anything in terms of critical minerals and rare earths anywhere close to sufficient to what we need. China controls 70% of the cobalt mining. The Biden administration is shutting down the largest reserve of cobalt in the United States in northern Minnesota. So, yeah, the answer is yes. Money's going to wind up in the hands of the Chinese. And you sit there with a blank look on your face because you don't have a response.
So, Congressman, I would love to respond, because what we've seen just over the first year since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed is over $100 billion in private investment in clean energy manufacturing. And so what we're doing is we are placing requirements on our grantees that they adhere to the statutory
But here's the thing.
Buy America requirements.
Yeah, I know you're pushing out electric vehicles and all that, but you cannot even make a battery, because I tell people we don't make semiconductors, microchips, we don't make batteries, we assemble them from parts from China.
So
we're not in any position to achieve energy independence in this country, which we could achieve almost overnight if we unleashed just our natural gas.
So fortunately, the Inflation Reduction Act trusts that we are going to deliver on that American manufacturing, and we're seeing the private sector mobilize. And I'm confident that as this program scales up and we're funding.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
You talked about emissions. Do you know how much emissions have gone down since 1980? Even though our economy's grown over 700%, our vehicle miles are up 90-something%. Do you have any idea how much we've reduced emissions?
I know that since 2005, we have reduced emissions significantly, even as the economy.
We've reduced emissions by over 60% of all 6 criteria gases the EPA tracks. You work for the EPA, you should have known that. Now yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Kamick, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Hoover for being in front of the committee today. You know, I think we all remember Solyndra, the boondoggle that was $570 million. And so today we're talking about $27 billion with a B going out the door in a 2-year period. And if you look at the Solyndra debacle, that was from 2005 to 2009. So much less money over a longer period of time, and here we are fast forwarding. I think this is setting up a recipe for disaster, but I'll jump right in. Mr. Hoover, how many pre-applications has your office received for these 3 programs?
So, Congressman, we've received a number of applications across all 3 competitions.
But specifically, how many pre-applications have you received?
Are you referring to the notices of intent under the Solar for All
To qualify to apply as the full application?
I want to be as accurate as possible. I'd be happy to follow up in writing with those specific numbers.
Did the EPA determine the structure of the program and then gauge whether there were applicants in existence or coalitions of applicants that could potentially form to meet the requirements and then carry out the program function? Or did the EPA assess the existence of appropriate recipients, potential recipients, and then tailor the program around those constraints?
So what we've been doing here is applying the eligible applicant criteria that are in the statute.
But I'm asking, how did you determine the eligibility of the applicant?
So the statute's quite specific that nonprofits have to meet 5 criteria. And so we have applied those 5 criteria, which I'd be happy to go into more detail if helpful.
Okay, so on some of the criteria for specifically the National Clean Investment Fund portion, in order to qualify for the program, qualified projects must comply with 6 items. So I'm just going to dig into a few of them. 1, reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions. Specifically, what percentage of greenhouse gas emissions meets this standard? And exactly how much do these recipients have to reduce greenhouse gases in order to meet this metric? And are they themselves responsible for reporting that number?
So under section 134A1, by statute, we can only invest in zero emission technologies. Under sections 134A2 and A3.
So it's not reducing, it's a 0.
So it's reducing relative to whatever the baseline piece of equipment is.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that it says in your own documentation, reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions, but there is no specific metric because what you're saying is that it should be 0? Then why even have reduce?
So, because I believe what you're referring to is the NCIF and CCIA programs that are authorized under sections 134A2 and A3.
Right, the
And
National
there
Clean
we're
Investment
able-
Fund.
Yeah, and there we're able to invest in low and zero emission technology.
But you don't give a specific metric by which they have to meet, and then you have no way to actually measure it.
So of the 70 evaluation criteria in the application, there are evaluation criteria around impact and how the grant applicants
Right, but
themselves
you're not answering my
assess.
question. You're basically saying that it's kind of a free-for-all, and that the applicant themselves, they could be the one to say, yes, we have in fact reduced greenhouse gas emissions.
So we wanted to provide flexibility for applicants to come to us with the very best plans. We will select the best plans, and then we will enter into a binding agreement.
So you're
with
just
them.
kind of building the metrics as you go, is what I'm hearing. And then one of the other metrics that you have under the National Clean Investment Fund is to, quote, deliver additional benefits to communities within designated categories. Exactly what does that mean? What is an additional benefit to the community?
So just on that last point, I want to stress that we have extensive experience on reporting across tens of thousands of
But what
grants.
is an additional benefit to a community specifically?
Many of the things we've talked about today, reducing air pollution, creating jobs.
Well, you have reducing air pollution as one of those other criteria, but, so a job creation is an additional benefit? How many jobs?
So again, we're going to be.
What if
working
this is
collaboratively with our-
pushing other jobs out?
So
Are we doing a net job gain?
So we're going to be working, again, this is why we've brought in 250 experts from all across the federal government, and we've made sure that each section of the applications is reviewed by the experts. So we've had the Department of Labor reviewing those parts of the application to make sure that we are doing the best possible job assessing.
And I'll follow up in writing on this because many of the things that you're pushing for are unfortunately going to kill jobs across communities, particularly in disadvantaged areas. And so I would love to see the reporting on that metric. But also, there's another thing that says this project may not have otherwise been financed. Why would the EPA fund a project that might not have otherwise been financed? And how does the EPA distinguish between a project that meets this goal and a project that is just a bad investment?
I'm so glad you asked that question because this is one of the most exciting aspects of this program. There are so many types of projects that Wall Street doesn't want to invest in because it's not profitable enough. But we have a long
Or maybe it's just not proven technology.
We have a long track record of the federal government with authorization.
With losing a lot of
Congress
taxpayer
supporting
money.
Programs that are incredibly impactful for communities all across the country.
Like Solyndra?
So again, this is a program that is going to be supporting commercialized technologies. So there's not going to be that same type of early stage project risk that you're speaking to. We're talking about loans for products like heat pumps and solar panels and on-site storage where the technology is well established, the business models are well established, and so the inherent risk of the investments are much lower.
And made in China. With that, I yield back.
Thanks, gentlelady. And now recognize Mr. Crenshaw of Texas for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a lot of concerns over this program because it's a piece of legislation that's written by a bunch of people who will then create the organizations that are designed to bid on these grants and these loans and profit from them. And look, that's oftentimes how a lot of grant programs are created. And, the question is it really for the greater good? That certainly remains a question with anything, with any of the conversations surrounding green energy and, zero carbon emissions. At what cost are we and at what benefit are we getting from it? The other concern here is the EPA doesn't have really any experience evaluating grantees regarding their ability to give out loans or have those loans paid back, assess the risk associated with those loans. Does the EPA have that kind of banking experience?
Thank you, Congressman. We do. We have a long track record of administering financial assistance programs through the state revolving funds, the WIFIA program, the Brownfields Revolving Loan Fund, and we've also drawn on our partners across government who have expertise at Treasury, Housing and Urban Development, and other agencies, Department of Agriculture, where we've done this successfully. So we both have the expertise at EPA, and we've been drawing on expertise from our peer agencies.
There's no expertise in banking and loans and this kind of massive grant giving, especially to the agencies that were just created. I mean, they even announced it themselves. They were just created for these programs. Do we have an audit system to verify that they're using this money appropriately, that the cost-benefit analysis is properly done, that we're getting these massive benefits for every dollar spent? How would that audit process happen?
Thank you for that question. Yes. So in accordance with the Code of Federal Regulations, every grantee is going to be subject to single audit for their financial performance. So any grantee that expends more than $750,000 in federal funds in their fiscal year will be subject to an independent audit. We will also be conducting performance audits on many of the dimensions.
But it's a third-party independent audit?
Yes, sir, under the Single Audit Act.
And who gets to choose who those auditors are? EPA?
So there's standard guidance from Office of Management and Budget on how to administer the Single Audit Act. We'd be happy to follow up in writing with that level of detail.
I mean, your own Inspector General said that this newly created program provides increased risk of fraud and abuse. Do you agree with that assessment?
So we value the perspective of our Inspector General and his team, and any time they have recommendations or concerns, we take them seriously. I also have confidence in the team that.
Did you make any of the changes that they recommended?
So we have an entire team at EPA that is tasked with following up on all of the corrective actions across any program from our Inspector General's office. We'd be happy to follow up with you if there are specific actions you're interested in.
So these grants are only for zero emissions. What if somebody applied for a grant to do a mining operation for critical minerals that are part of making batteries and solar panels and things of that nature? Zero carbon energy production. We could use grant money for mining operations.
So under this program, we have those 6 criteria that we spoke to a few minutes ago, and so we would want to make sure that there is a direct co-benefit to American communities and that it reduces or avoids air pollutants. But again, if it meets the 6 criteria that the Congresswoman just walked through a moment ago, we've intentionally not prohibited our applicants from any particular type of activity, as long as they are meeting the criteria of how we've defined qualified projects.
Okay, that was a runaround. So would mining operations work in that favor since we need certain critical minerals to make all these wonderful things that you want for green energy, or do we just want to keep importing them?
So we absolutely want to do everything we can to support domestic manufacturing. We want to mine, refine, and manufacture here in America, and thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, we have the support both at EPA and across the federal government to do so. I can't speak to whether a specific type of project would be eligible under this program because it depends on the proposals that we've received and how our grantees are setting, how we're going to set that strategic vision with them.
All right, I'm out of time. Yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Dinkle of Michigan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm taking a lot of this personally from my colleagues on the other side, I have to say, since this, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was actually a bill that I introduced. It was based on a model in Michigan that worked. Actually, Republican governor was part of it. And I will just say to my colleagues that when we went to a renewable requirement in Michigan a number of years ago, everybody screamed and yelled and raised a lot of concerns. And the fact of the matter is, it's worked and energy costs have gone down. So I think that investing in clean energy and the survival of our environment is something we all need to be working on together. We got a moral responsibility to do it. It's a great economic opportunity. And I know that my Republican colleagues don't like this. You continue to attack any investment like this, but I think we need to be investing in American families and manufacturers that work to address the climate crisis. And we need to understand that we need to level the playing field. China is beating us right now, but they're doing it because the government is investing in R&D. The government is trying to beat us, and we're in a global marketplace. And if we don't invest here in this country, we're abandoning ourselves. I don't want to see Uyghur labor building these things. I want to see us investing in this country. I keep going back to Japanese when they beat us in the 70s. I worked at the auto industry then. We weren't ready. We didn't make the investments, and we need to have a level playing field. So I'm just going to say that to my colleagues as we keep talking about this. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which we all know was established in the Inflation Reduction Act, which I think is probably one of the bills you all hate the most, but there are a lot of things in there that you all like in your district. We'll invest $27 billion to deploy clean technology and projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The program will help make clean energy financing more accessible to low-income and underserved communities, communities that have for far too long carried the brunt of environmental pollution. I admit I've been a vocal supporter of a clean energy accelerator because of its potential to accelerate the clean energy transition, especially in underserved communities. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund will help us attack the climate crisis head-on and move us closer to an equitable clean energy economy. It will also bring the public and private sectors together around a shared goal of decarbonizing our country and creating jobs, all while lowering significant energy costs. And again, I'm going to say to my friends, because the Chinese government's invested, they're beating us in intellectual property. I will not secede our leadership in innovation and technology to anybody, and we've got a responsibility to compete, and that's part of what we're trying to do. I know, because I ask the same tough questions you do, that EPA is laser focused on making sure every dollar is reaching projects that would not be built otherwise, ensuring that Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund investments are additive, not just duplicating other efforts. And we got to make sure the dollars are spent the right way. Democrats and Republicans have to work to make sure that that happens. So I know you all want to see EPA and the greenhouse gas reductions fail. I would beg you to work with us to make sure that this program's implemented effectively and not bet against this fund. And I'd say give it a chance before you try to defund it before any dollars ever gone out the door. So having said that, Mr. Hoover, can you explain why the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is so vital for communities across the country?
Congresswoman Dingell, thank you for your leadership in authorizing the program and for your confidence in EPA to implement it. We are going.
And I will hold you accountable. You know that.
Absolutely.
I can be worse than that.
This program is going to fund tens of thousands of projects in communities across the country that today are not able to access affordable financing for these clean energy technologies that are good for public health, good for folks' pocketbooks, good for the climate. And so we're going where right now there's a market failure, and the federal government has a long track record of stepping in to correct these kinds of market failures, to get the private sector in the game, and we're going to do that in a way that reduces emissions and helps American families.
I got 15 seconds for you to tell us how you're going to ensure that every dollar appropriated is spent to foster that community-driven clean energy project as Congress intended?
We share your commitment to ensuring that every dollar is spent according to the highest ethical standards. We've leveraged all of the best experts across the agency and the federal government, and I am so excited about the announcements that we're going to be making later this year and the work that we're going to be funding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to wave on to this. Mr. Hoover, it's my understanding, and I think it's been pointed out numerous times today during this hearing, that the EPA's really never operated a program like this before, and that you sought input from outside organizations. I'm not absolutely opposed to that. In fact, I may like it in some ways, but according to EPA, you engaged with organizations interested in the success of the program and hosted targeted stakeholder roundtables. But while gaining the feedback is helpful, there are reports that suggest that the EPA may have inappropriately delegated the authority to design the program too. In fact, according to reports accompanied by EPA emails, in October of 2022, the EPA convened a small group meeting of advocacy groups and think tanks to provide early feedback on the EPA's request for information on the program and ask clarifying questions. How did you decide which groups to invite?
Congressman, the Inflation Reduction Act was enacted in August of 2022, and that fall we launched an extensive public engagement process. We reached thousands of individuals and organizations through requests for information, meetings, town halls, and charges to our federal advisory boards. And so everyone who wanted an opportunity to come talk to EPA had an opportunity. What's really important is that in every one of those meetings, we had two critical safeguards. First, we never met with any individual or organization one-on-one. And second, we never disclosed any non-public information about the program to anyone. In fact, that fall...
So if they showed up and they had an interest in it, you allowed them to participate?
Public comment is an important part of making sure
Understood,
that we do the job
understood.
right.
But with the think tanks that you were with the different groups, I mean, how did you decide which ones, if indeed this is true, that you delegated authority to design the program?
We did not delegate authority to anyone. We invited everyone we thought would be interested, and as we heard from more folks that were interested, we added additional meetings for them too. We wanted to reach everyone, hear the very best ideas, and then we took that information and we used that as a federal agency to inform how we, a federal agency, designed the program.
How many of these meetings are we talking about? How many did you have?
There were dozens of meetings that were held consistent with our federal ethics rules and competition policy, with our general counsel's office present in all of those meetings.
How many are we talking about?
We held several town halls. We had dozens of meetings with
Dozens?
hundreds of over thousands of individuals and organizations.
Were any of these groups, were they partners or coalition members or of any applicants applying for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund awards?
Again, we had thousands of people participate. I would assume that some of them then chose to apply.
Do you consider that to be fair if they were potentially going to gain from this?
So the important thing is that everyone had an equal opportunity to provide input at the front end of the process. There were two parts of this, right? There was the design phase where we wanted to hear everyone's best ideas, and then we went and designed the competition. And then there's the evaluation and selection process. And during the evaluation and selection process, the only folks in the room are the federal government. And everyone who's been participating has to adhere to our high standards for federal ethics rules and impartiality.
We've always heard the wolf garden at hen house. I mean, were these groups that were giving this input, did they have the opportunity to apply for some of these funds?
So, Congressman, anytime
It's yes or no. I mean, it's...
Anyone who's eligible for the program is eligible to apply. And we conducted public engagement that was widely available and open for folks to attend and provide.
Have you made public a list of the targeted stakeholder meetings?
I'd have to check and get back to you. We've made a lot of information
Okay.
public.
I'd ask you to do that. If you could get back with us and submit that to this committee, Mr. Chairman, we sure would appreciate it. That'd be very important information for us to understand. Look, I don't want you to think I'm accusatory, because I kind of like the idea of going to outside groups and getting input. But if they've got a vested interest in this, then it looks like this may be a conflict of interest. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, Congressman, what's important to note here is that we've worked closely hand in hand at every step of the process with our career ethics attorneys and our career office of grants.
And that's what scares me when you say career, so just FYI.
They are the folks that hold the agency accountable for the high standards of both federal ethics law and EPA's competition.
Okay, well, if you'll get that list to this subcommittee, I sure would appreciate it.
We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. Seeing there are no further members wishing to ask questions, I'd like to thank our witness again for being here and testifying today. Just making sure I heard the door click, just making sure somebody wasn't trying to get in the last second. I would ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Hearing no objection, that will be the order. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask that the witness submit his response within 10 business days upon receipt of the question. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.